you new to sewing and you've heard the word selvage and thought to yourself, what the is that? Don't worry, you're not alone. I felt the same way when I first started sewing. There's so many terms that make no sense, but don't worry because in this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about selvage, plus why this word is so important for your sewing projects. It's one of the most important, so make sure that you listen all the way till the end because this will be a game changer for your sewing. Hi, my name's Abby, and I taught myself to sew clothes from home just like you're doing. And I'm on a mission to make your life easier than mine was. So this whole channel is full of videos that make your life getting started sewing your own clothes easier, from sewing terms like selvage to beginner-friendly projects that you can make without a sewing pattern. It's all here, so make sure that you subscribe below. That way you can start sewing your dream clothes ASAP. What is selvage? Imagine with me, just close your eyes if you'd like, and imagine that we're at the fabric store. And you're walking around, you find a fabric that you absolutely love, you grab it and you take it to the cut counter, right? And when you get there, you tell them how much fabric you want. And then they start unrolling your fabric from that cardboard rectangle, right? So they're actually unrolling the fabric along the selvage edge. Okay, so the selvage is a specific edge of your fabric. So they unroll along the selvage, and then you tell them 2 yards, right? And they cut perpendicular to, I know, going back to high school geometry, but perpendicular to, or at a right angle to the selvage, okay? So this means that your fabric has 2 selvage edges along this side where they're unrolling the fabric, and 2 cut edges. So where the previous person had a section cut, and then where they cut it for your length. Okay, so the selvage edge is just this side of your fabric. Okay, nothing too crazy there. But you may be thinking, Abby, obviously when I'm at the fabric store and they're unrolling it, cool, that's the selvage edge, and I see them cut it, perfect, that's the cut edge. But what about when I get home? Like, how do I remember which side is which? Don't worry, there's a couple of really easy ways to find a selvage edge. The first one is if you are buying your fabric at Joann's or Hobby Lobby or places like that, a lot of these fabrics will actually have a white selvage along the edges, okay? It's really easy to spot, and typically inside of this white selvage, they'll have information about the design. They'll typically have who sold it, so Joann's, the designer, whoever that may be, and they will have colored circles, like swatches almost. And you can actually use these to color match if you want to do thread for your project, or if you want to do like color blocking, you want to have some of it be patterned and some of your project be a solid color. You can actually use these little color blocked areas to find colors that match your fabric. So they can be really useful. Now, what if your fabric doesn't have this white bar along the side? And that does happen with lots of other fabrics, and there's still a lot of tricks we can use to figure out which side is the selvage edge. One of them, which is my favorite, is if you're working with a fabric that is not stretchy, when you pull on it, it doesn't do very much, then you can go to the corner, okay? Because any corner is going to be where a selvage and a cut edge meet, right? Because it's a square. Okay, so one of these edges is going to be the selvage and one is going to be the cut edge. Now, if we look close at this fabric that I have right here, you can actually see that the fibers or the threads inside of this fabric run like a grid. So there's ones that go like in this direction, and there's ones that go across. Okay. Now, if we go back to this picture of the of our fabric, then any threads that run in the same direction as the selvage are called the warp threads. And any threads that go in the same direction as the cut edge are the weft threads. Now, these are just extra sewing terms. So if you hear them in the future, you'll just have like a reference. Oh yeah, that just means it's going the direction, this direction or that direction. Okay, nothing too crazy, and you won't see those very often. This direction, where you have your warp threads and we're going parallel to the selvage edge, that direction is called the straight grain. Okay, and I'm going to use that a couple more times because it's going to be really important when I tell you why the selvage edge is crucial for your sewing projects. So the straight grain goes parallel to the selvage edge. Okay, and the cross grain goes parallel to the cut edge. So cross grain, cut edge, straight, selvage, cut, cross. Hopefully that helps. Now, if we come back to this white fabric and we see our grid here again, we need to figure out which of these is the straight grain and which is the cross grain. So to do this, what we need to know is this fun fact. And the fun fact is that the selvage edge does not unravel. Okay, that's one of the really nice things about a selvage edge is it's finished. It doesn't unravel and come apart. So if I come down to the corner of this white fabric and we look at these two, which side do you think is the selvage edge and which edge do you think is the cut edge? Yeah, so this side is not unraveling. So that's the selvage edge. And this one that is unraveling is the cut edge. Okay, so again, if you're working with woven fabrics, this is a super quick and easy way to figure out which is the selvage and which is the cut edge. But you may be wondering, Abby, why? Why does one unravel and the other doesn't? And I am going to tell you because it's actually really interesting. So if we do like a close-up of the fibers inside of this, and you see here that the pink threads are your weft threads, and the green threads are your warp threads, okay? So you can see the weft threads, as we talked about, it's a grid. So the pink threads weave around the green threads. But you'll see here that the pink threads, when they make it to the end of your fabric, to the selvage edge, they loop back on themselves. They don't end. It's not that the thread gets to the end of the fabric and they cut it and they start a new line. They just continue using the same thread back and forth, back and forth. So there's no loose ends here. Everything is nice and wrapped in on itself. That's why the selvage edge doesn't unravel. Versus if you look at the cut edge, so if we cut this along, like here, you'll see that now we have a bunch of warp threads that are just loose and hanging and dangling. And then if we start pulling on the pink thread, those weft threads, you'll see it just starts pulling out. And you can even see this on the real fabric. So I tried to take a video. I'll see if it's clear here or not. But you can see that this thread is continuous, okay? So that's why the selvage edge doesn't unravel, and why for woven fabrics, again, fabrics that aren't stretchy, that you can go to the corner of any of your fabric and find which edge is not unraveling. And that will be your selvage edge. Now, I mentioned that woven fabrics are not stretchy. The opposite of that would be stretchy fabrics, and those are typically called knit. So which fabric are you wanting to sew with? Woven or knit? Let me know down in the comments. Then let's see what happens if we have a knit fabric. So knit fabric doesn't unravel like woven fabric. Why? Because when you knit something, you make lots of loops like this. Okay, it's not the straight grid that we had with woven fabrics. So if I cut along here, you see, we might have a couple little loose threads. But once we pull those out, there's this nice looping along the bottom. So we won't have any unraveling like we did before. So let me give you a couple more tips and tricks that you can use to find the selvage edge, even if you're working with knit fabrics. The first one is that if you come to the edge of the fabric, you'll see these little holes. Okay, so that's where the loom actually holds the fabric and moves it along the loom. So you could find these little holes along the edge. Another thing you can look at is that the selvage edge typically looks just a little bit different or very different, but maybe just a little bit different than the rest of the fabric because it's typically woven more tightly than the rest of the fabric. And that's also to help it keep from unraveling. So if you look at this edge of the fabric, it's just a little bit, the texture is a little bit different. It's not exactly matching the rest of everything else. And the last thing you can look for is how straight the edge is. Because again, the selvage edge is going to be perfectly straight. It's coming from the loom. It is what it is. But when the people at the fabric store cut this, it may not have been an exactly straight line. It might be a little bit wavy, or there might be like a cut mark like you see here. So look for that if you can't find any other way to tell what the selvage is. So it's a ton of tips and tricks. One of them should work for you. So now we've talked about what the selvage is and how to find it. And before I talk about why it's so important and why you need to know what this is for your sewing, I just want to give you a really quick other tip is that if you're brand new to sewing and you're feeling a little bit nervous about possibly your sewing machine, I know terms is one thing, but the sewing machine is another part where people, when they're just getting started, can feel a little bit nervous or intimidated. Then down in the description, I have my 5 steps to sewing confidence for you, absolutely free. Okay, it's everything you need from unboxing your sewing machine to sewing straight stitches really quickly, learning how to do that, and getting the tension set perfectly so you have beautiful, nice stitches. So if that would help you, it's down in the description. Now, let's get to the importance of the selvage. When you sew anything, you're going to need to cut your fabric into shapes in order to make whatever it is that you want to make. And those shapes have a specific direction they need to be placed on your fabric. Now, I don't recommend absolute beginners use sewing patterns. I would recommend instead looking for projects that you can sew without a pattern. I have a bunch on my channel. There's also a bunch of amazing other YouTubers who have those kinds of projects. Look for those first. But just for this example, just to give you the idea of what I'm talking about, I'm going to show you some patterns because it's going to make this easier to understand. Okay? So, for example, if I have these 3 sewing patterns, I cut them out of paper, perfect. Now I want to trace and cut them out of fabric. But which direction do I put them on the fabric? They could go any way, literally, I could slap them on here anywhere. How do I know the right way to put them on? And yes, there is a right way, because if you don't put them in the right direction, your final project can look weird. For example, if I make a dress and I don't lay these pattern pieces correctly, the fabric can look like it's twisting around me instead of hanging straight down like I want it to. Okay, so to make sure your projects look the best they possibly can, then we need to lay these pattern pieces down correctly. And to do that, each pattern piece has arrows on it. 90% of the time, these arrows will run parallel to the selvage. That's why we need to know which edge is the selvage edge. That way we can line all of our pattern pieces up with it. Can you imagine if you didn't know which side this was? Like, your pattern pieces could be anywhere. This is so important. So you're going to take your pattern pieces and you're going to line the arrows up with the selvage. Now, read the pattern. It will tell you for sure. Like you may have to do it parallel to the cut edge instead of the selvage, but you know which edge that is as well, don't you? That's why knowing what the selvage edge is so important. And I hope that now you know what the selvage is, how to find it on your fabric, and how to line up your pattern pieces correctly. Do you feel more confident now? Do you feel like you know what selvage is? Let me know down in the comments if you have any other questions, if this video helped you. If it did, give it a like. I would really appreciate it, and it helps more people find the video so more people can learn how important this is. And if you're feeling confident with selvage, maybe it's time to jump into your first sewing project. So if you're looking for a fun one to start right now, check out one of the ones I have on screen. No matter what your next step is in your sewing journey, happy sewing!